We then asked for the statements of all these people that had been detained with us, amongst which, naturally, we also got Mr. Ramaphosa's statement, what he had made to the police. So one day we were having these discussions and debates, and then and somebody approached me from behind and felled me with a fork. It was quite a blow, but it was fortunate because this is the hardest part of the scar. I will not resign from the Congress of the People. So many of the people do come and say, but had we listened to what you and the others were saying, we would not have what the ANC itself has now called the 9 wasted years.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today I'm really excited to be joined by a struggle stalwart and a formidable politician who has been at the center of South African politics, both before and in our constitutional era. None other than the president of COPE, Mr. Mosiuoa Lekota. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good day.
You were sent to Robben Island in the 1970s, I believe, while you were in your 20s for activities related to your involvement in the South African Students' Organization, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Could you tell us more about that?
Well, the South African Students' Organization, SASO, was for the black sections of the population. And we had, very many of us had been members of other organizations, in particular the National Union of South African Students. But we suffered the humiliation of always being harassed by the special branches, the security police, who saw this as contrary, well, I shouldn't say them, but the government using the special branch thought that we were anti-government and we were a threat to social order and so on. Until at some point, in 1966, I think, Steve Biko raised the issue that we cannot never sustain a normal organization in an abnormal society. And therefore that it was important that perhaps we should form our own organization to underline the fact that blacks are capable of doing things even without their white counterparts. What we were interested in pursuing the non-racial policies of the National Union of South African Students at the time was to underline the humanity of everybody. Not that we needed to be with whites. And if we could not be with, then we should perhaps stand by ourselves, discover our, show what we were capable of doing. And then that might send a message to the whites who thought that we needed to be with them and we needed them. So we used to say, I'm black and I'm proud. I'm black and I'm comely. I'm black and I'm a human being. Like anybody else, I can do anything that any person can do. But strangely, the regime of apartheid felt still uncomfortable about that. And as a result of their policies, of course, Africans, Indian, colored sections of the population were treated as this kind of lepers that could not and should not be allowed to mix with their white counterparts. Later on, we formed the Black People's BPC, Black People's Convention, which was an overt political organization. At some point, the regime felt that even this black consciousness was something wrong, was something, a danger to society. And we got arrested.
And that was around support for Mozambican independence, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of your specific arrest. What were the circumstances around that particular event that led you to Robben Island?
Principally, we were charged under a law called, it was called...
was it the Terrorism Act?
Terrorism Act. It was the Terrorism Act. And which included, among other things, racism as an element of it and all of that. And so and it did send us to jail. I know that we were charged principally with 2 accounts, racism,
wow,
racial discrimination, and then, of course, that we were teaching hatred.
Wow.
Racial hatred.
Can't believe that a racist regime sent you to jail for teaching racism.
That's very queer, actually. But the long and short of it is that when the trial had run its course, we were found guilty on count 1, advocating racism. But it was not called advocating racism, but racial hatred.
Sure.
Yeah, something like that.
Could I ask you just there, what do you remember about the trial itself? And how did it leave an impact on you?
Well, what I do remember is that I think it was very alienating because it left many of us feeling that, but what really are we supposed to do? What really is there that we can do and would be acceptable? And we had gone through torture and all of those kind of things, assaults by the special branches and so on.
Sure.
And some of our comrades were very, very damaged. People like Strini Moodley, people like Seth Cooper were very harshly treated, and Comrade Nefolovode was also very badly treated by the special branch. And not all of us survived, came through without some measure of damage. But 9 of us, when initially we were charged, we were about 13, I think. And when the final charges came, it was 9, because after the discussions about the case, it was found that four of the people that were in it, including Strini Moodley's younger brother, were dismissed.
Right.
And so 9 of us went on trial. And when the trial was finished, we were all found guilty. 3 of us were found guilty only of the racial hatred thing. But 6 of us were found guilty of both count 1, spreading racism, and the second count as well. So, which meant that some of us were found guilty of 2 counts, and the other was 1 count. So we were found guilty on both counts. 5 years for this count 1, and 5 years count 2. But the 6 had to. The sentences had to run concurrently, so
right.
we had to do 6 years, and the others did 5 years.
I see. And before we come to your time on Robben Island, because I'm very fascinated about that, the allegations that you made against President Cyril Ramaphosa that he stringently denies, it's fair to also say, did that relate to that case, or because you suggested that under interrogation he quote sold you out? Can you help us situate where that happened in history?
That was in the first trial, because you see, part of our arrest arose from the fact that, as a result of Black consciousness, Abraham Tiro, who was representing the graduates at the University of the North, made a speech in which, among other things, he pointed out to Einstein, who was the Minister of Education, Bantu Education or Education, whatever he was called, and that they continue to dominate our institutions that they say is our institutions. And then he pointed out that he was warning them that they come into these institutions, now they are the VIPs in those institutions, and our parents, when we are graduating, are sitting outside and they are sitting in the hall and all of them. So this really was very, very offensive. But he pointed out also that it's just a matter of time. At some point or the other, whatever weapons they have, they must understand that Black people will fight for their freedom and that we will defeat apartheid, whatever the weapons they had. The consequence of that was that he was expelled. Then, of course, we mobilized students to resist this, to boycott classes. And we were arrested, and then the various campuses fought here. Salisbury Island was a university for the Indian section of the population. I said Fort here. Ngoye was for the Amazulu, and then there was the Cape, the Western Cape, was for the colored section of the population. Fort Hare was for Amaxhosa, and so on. A few students, Black students also at vets, and others were at for medical education, medical training. They were at the University of Durban, what was called Wentworth at that time. They had a separate residence of their own. So all this discriminatory thing led to a lot of students arrested around to come to this 9 that ultimately was charged.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, sorry, what was your question?
Oh, yes. So I was asking about where President Ramaphosa and the allegations he made
that's right. Now, I don't like discussing this. I spoke about it in Parliament.
Yes, of course.
And I was under oath there. I could talk. I could say whatever was correct.
Yeah. And
we were detained, and he was also detained with us. He was detained with us.
I see, right. Because you coincided at the University of the North, or at a similar time he was there.
Yeah, when he went to Terfloop, he found us there already.
Right.
And he was coming. He was a first-year student at the beginning of 72.
I see.
We recruited him to the South African student organization. Specifically, myself and the late Aubrey Mokoena. I don't know if you know Aubrey Mokoena. You might know about him. We recruited him to the South African Students Organization.
Wow.
And it arises from this, that when we were now in detention, because his father was a police sergeant in Johannesburg here. So when we were arrested, because he joined SASO as a result of our recruiting him. So when we were at the University of the North, and when we got arrested, and he got detained because I think some people must have mentioned that he was also a member of the South African Students Organization.
I see.
And he was involved in the SASO branch there.
Okay.
Now, when we were in detention, but because, we really got assaulted by the police.
Sure.
So, you had people made statements and all of that. When we were ultimately charged, he was not charged. He was not the only one who was not charged, but he was one of the people who were not charged. So we went on trial. And when the trial ran, and when it was finished, well, I must be a little bit more systematic. First of all, I said we were 13 when we were first charged. Now, and then as I said, 4 of the accused persons were released at the end of the state case.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure whether he was released after when the state case closed or what, but when that happened and it was now decided the 9 of us are the people that really. Our advocates encouraged us to ask for the statements of all the people that we were detained with.
Right. So the other 4 as well.
No, the other 4 had already been defending themselves.
I see.
Because the state case is when the state says it's evidence against the accused.
Sure.
But at the end of that, there was no sufficient evidence for these 4. That's why they were released.
Right.
Now...
Sorry, so just to clarify, was President Ramaphosa one of the remaining 9?
No, he was not detained. He was not charged with us. He was simply one of the detainees. He remained with the detainees.
I see.
And when the state case ended, all the detainees then were released.
I see.
The advocates then said to us, well, you are now entitled to ask for the statements of all the guys with whom you were detained.
Okay, yeah.
Because it may well be that they may have said things in their statements
that implicated you.
Which will help you. No.
Oh, right.
Which will help you to defend your case.
Sure.
And so that's how it went. I remember very well that the Attorney General of the Transvaal at the time was a certain Mr. John Rees. We then asked for the statements of all these people that had been detained with us, amongst which, naturally, we also got Mr. Ramaphosa's statement, what he had made to the police. Now, so we had to read through them and so on. It is in that statement that I read that he told the police that he was a very good boy, Christian boy, and that I had put communist ideas in his head. And because the advocates kept asking me before this, but why are you accused number 3? There must be something you have done which led to this thing. But I couldn't explain really how I can. So now, when we saw his statement, because we're reading these statements, all of us, so I saw, he says that now I put communist ideas in his head. That's what he wrote to the special branch. Now, so it explained, therefore, why I became, well, not only charged, but I became accused number 3 in the trial.
Right.
So that is the thing I was saying about him, that when the chips were down, you now put the blame on us so that you could yourself be released and all of that. Now you are trying to invite us to come in and work with you. You should have come with us and gone all the way.
Right. And as I mentioned, in fairness to President Ramaphosa, he has denied your allegations, but it's just interesting to hear your perspective. And I just wasn't sure exactly where it fitted historically, so you've helped me to clarify that.
Yeah.
I wanted to come on to Robben Island and your experiences there, because we hear some stories in struggle literature that when the Black consciousness group, of which in some ways you were part, arrived at Robben Island, you brought a sort of radical energy to the island. What are your memories of Robben Island, and how do you look back on that period? And are there any encounters with other struggle leaders in our history that you had there that have stuck with you?
Well, let me first of all say this, that when we got to Robben Island, we found that there were more political parties because at this time, when we were arrested and what was, the ANC and all the other political parties, Pan-Africanist Congress and all of that, were banned. You could hardly find literature on them. And in fact, even if you were found talking about them, you could easily find yourself going to jail. Now, when we got to Robben Island, we found a situation in which there was tension between members of 7 members of the ANC and some members of other organizations,
right?
Like the Pan-Africanist Congress, obviously. There were a number of different organizations. And one of the key issues that arose was the question of what the correct attitude should be towards white people on our part. The ANC was non-racial, and one could understand why that their position was like that. The Pan-Africanist Congress approach was that Africa belongs to Africans, and that's it, you know. And so there were debates about that. I mean, I'm sorry, but I've suffered 2 strokes, you know, and my memory is no longer so good.
No.
I cannot remember the names of all these other political parties, but there were quite a number of other political parties there. And so the debates were raging now and then. So then there was a contest where some of the political parties wanted to recruit us to them, etc. A tension developed amongst us in the Black consciousness movement,
right?
You know? To say, now, what is your attitude towards the whites and so on? So now, I took a position that we had only formed a blacks-only organization, not because we were anti-white, not because we were against non-racialism, but because we felt that we had to deal with the practical situation that we were faced with. So the debate and so on. And actually, SASO had adopted a policy document at its second General Student Council in 1971. And in that policy manifesto, it pointed out that Black consciousness is not and does not mean anti-whiteism. I'm quoting it verbatim. Anti-whiteism. It's not anti-whiteism, but merely a situation, an attempt to form an acceptable situation in the circumstances of the of the racism we were faced with. And I insisted that the policy manifesto of the South African Students' Organization still exists. I think if you look in some of the Google or something, you'll probably find it's there.
Okay.
It still says what I'm saying, that it's specifically said that Black consciousness does not mean anti-whiteism. But some of my co-accused were more inclined towards the PAC position. And so we had lots of arguments about this. And then I said, no, I'm sorry, but I cannot subscribe to something which I had never subscribed to before. And even in the SASO, in the Black Consciousness organization, the position remains like that, and it's actually written in black and white. And I remembered very well how Steve Bantu Biko actually was the one who enunciated that. But I think I upset some of the people. And in the tensions that we were faced with and so on, one of the comrades in the Black Consciousness movement, you see, if you look here, you will see there is a scar there.
Yeah.
So one day we were having these discussions and debates, and then and somebody approached me from behind and felled me with a fork. It was quite a blow, but it was fortunate because this is the hardest part of the scar, and I lost my balance and consciousness. I woke up and so on. I was taken to the hospital then. But we refused. I refused, actually, because the authorities wanted to charge the guy. He died now, that comrade. Yeah.
Okay.
We were released, and when he was released and all of that, after some time, and then he passed out. He passed away outside. I don't know what he died of, and so. And so I'm mentioning that merely to say that we refused to testify against each other, even if they were, especially when they quarrels amongst ourselves, because we knew that the authorities would use that to exacerbate the differences between the political organization. So I didn't, I refused, and that there was no court case or anything like that arising from this. I don't know why you asked me this question, but we came out of jail and we just went on as usual. Yeah. I didn't. By the way, I then joined the African National Congress. In fact, I decided I must join the African National Congress to underline the fact that I'm for non-racialism. I'm not for this other approach that was being taken. And I still don't think that anybody who's a genuine follower of Black consciousness can say that Black consciousness is racism or fed up. It is not. It never was, even at its inception.
Well, the reason I asked you is, I just think intergenerationally, it's so important to preserve these conversations, and particularly for the younger audience that watches this show, for us to appreciate the history. And so thank you for sharing those memories with us. We could actually, we only have an hour, but maybe when we call you back, we'll go into the Dalmas trial, which came after.
There's one thing I want to say.
Yeah, sure.
I want to say about this thing of President Ramaphosa.
Sure.
You see, he confessed, even in Parliament, that his father used to come to jail to ask him and persuade him to testify against us. So I asked him the question, when your father asked you to go and testify against us, what is it that you had said in your statement that you would go and confirm under oath? What is it? Because the security police won't say, come and testify, if there's not something you have said against the accused. So what is it that they wanted you to go and confirm before the court? He's never answered me to this day.
Have you ever spoken to him privately about this?
No, I spoke to him. We were there in the court, in Parliament.
Right.
In Parliament,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I was speaking there under oath. And he was also speaking under oath. It was for him to challenge me in those circumstances, to deny, to say what he had done and so on. And so I said, no, I'm very, very sorry. You betrayed us at a critical moment. And it was not about the struggle of the Americans, as you are talking about in your statement when you were asking us to come and join you.
Well, it's a fascinating observation from history, and thank you for sharing those reflections with us as well. I'd like to come on to some contemporary issues,
yes,
because of course we have an election in front of us, and when we move from your decision to join the ANC, maybe an interesting entry point into...
Maybe, I'm sorry, man, but before you go to that, because you were asking me about You were asking me about the...
Delmas.
About the Delmas, right?
Yeah.
What was your question there?
Well, I hadn't actually asked a question. I said we must actually come back for part 2 to discuss
I see your point.
Delmas.
I see. All right. Okay.
But I do want to come on to some of the contemporary issues.
Yeah.
You joined the ANC, as you say, as a result of what the point you made within internal Black consciousness debates.
Yes, yeah.
You left the ANC after Polokwane and President Zuma's rise to power within the party. I wonder what you make, therefore, of the rise of the MK party now, and how do you respond to President Zuma's reintroduction into formal electoral politics?
Well, man, I must confess that I'm very sorry that I don't think I can discuss that because that is post my departure from the ANC. When we left the African National Congress, we were concerned with the problems that we were having there.
Sure.
Suddenly, we felt that there were people in the leadership that were being proposed for the leadership. Sorry. Now, and we knew lots of things about each other. And then we also knew about that and so on and things. And there were people we just felt, frankly, if you are going to do this, if you are going to put this type of person in the leadership of the organization, then we can't see a future. And I think history has proven now as correct. So many of the people do come and say, but had we listened to what you and the others were saying, we would not have what the ANC itself has now called the 9 wasted years. Now, I keep saying, look, I cannot say anything about this 9 wasted years, but the ANC has itself referred to the period that followed our departure. Because we felt that we needed men and women who could be trusted, who really would pursue the policy positions that we have always known that the outstanding leaders of the African National Congress have pursued. But this is not it. And I remain firm on that. I really remain very firm that the ANC had produced, I mean, the men and women who went to the Congress of the People in 55 and drew up the Freedom Charter. And I include amongst them, Chief Albert Luthuli was there, Z.K. Matthews, Helen Josephs, Lillian Ngoyi, Mrs. Sisulu, so many of them, very many, Dadu, Dr. Dadu, and all these outstanding leaders would never have accommodated these kind of things that the ANC today just overlook and like that. And so we remain firm, and that's why we adopted the name Congress of the People. Is not our coinage, you see? Yeah. Congress of the People. We still styled ourselves in the manner of the men and women who wrote the Freedom Charter, who had been leading in the various organizations, the 5 organizations that formed the Congress of the People. We really hold them in very high esteem, all of them without exception. And so that's why we decided to style ourselves the Congress of the People. And you can see when we drew this emblem, what we did was to adopt the national flag, colors of the national flag. And that's why we have the red color up there and the blue color down there, to show that we remain very loyal to the teachings of the African National Congress, even at the negotiations, that we wanted white South Africa to see themselves as part of the new order of things that was rising. And that's why the red, white, and blue, that is the colors of the flag that the Afrikaners had adopted for themselves, or let me say, the apartheid had adopted for themselves to represent themselves. And then we said, no, now that we are negotiating peace and we have agreed we want one South Africa, this must also become part of the colors of the national flag. And that is why it's there. So now you can see black, gold, and green being the colors that were the original colors of the African National Congress, which remained as such, representing the black sections, generally speaking. Now, this white that is around holding everything together, that is the peace that was negotiated at CODESA. This peace round, holding us like that, brings all the people of South Africa under that peace. And the black that is surrounding the outside is for the continent, because South Africa is part of the continent of Africa. And we are part of that. Now, the green there shows that these people of South Africa, all of them, have equal rights. They may vote. And that green is for the vote. This color that is in here is the original gold in the flag of 1912.
Right.
Was representing the wealth of South Africa, gold, because South Africa produced the highest amount of gold in the world. Certainly at that time, I'm not so sure what the situation now is. So we adopted this as our emblem.
Very interesting analysis there, and also in terms of where you emerged from the ANC. How do you analyze this election? Because many South Africans are saying this could be the first time in our democratic history that the ANC loses its majority. Do you go along with that? And what would the significance of that be for you?
Well, I must say that I don't like being a prophet, and I'm honestly cautious about that.
Oh yeah, last time there was a bit of a problem with the hat and all that, so we won't say anything.
You are
about
very
the
right.
hat.
Yeah. So I've learned from that as well.
Fair
Yes,
enough, yeah.
Now I do think that the atmosphere around this election is quite different. I think very many South Africans, especially I think when they look back to what is called the 9 wasted years, I think, and they look at the conditions in which our people find themselves, I think very many people who otherwise would have voted for the ANC or have voted for the ANC previously, I think they will not vote for the ANC. Just how many and what will happen now that as I say, I'm shy to.
Fair enough.
To stick my neck out and say, no, that is going to be so-and-so and all of that, yeah.
And what about COPE? Because we've seen some internal divisions in the party. On the other hand, you're still here. Talk us through, the departure of the former Deputy President Willie Madisha and these factional fights that have, characterized a lot of what has happened in COPE in the last 5 years.
I don't know why people say that there were internal fights. They were not fights. First of all, if you take the issue you're talking about of Mr. Madisha and them, I fell ill. I fell ill. I mean, I've had a heart attack. I've suffered 2 strokes. I suffered an attack of prostate cancer. I've survived all of that.
And may I just say, we're very glad that you have survived all of that.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that the doctors were able to deal with all these problems. Now, at the time especially when I had prostate cancer,
right?
There's comrades who felt that I was so weak that I could die anytime. And they actually went on to announce that, no, Terror is just gone now. He's going to die. It was very, it was shocking to me later on when I discovered that, hey man, these guys, and then they felt that, no, we must now do something with, and we must get, Madisha must become the president and so on. Now, when I became aware of it, I said, no, this organization has got a constitution, and it prescribes in that constitution that we need to call a congress so that there can be the members of the party can elect a successor. If in fact you feel I'm so sick that I must no longer be allowed to continue, let's call a congress. And indeed, the Congress National Committee said no. There's no way that it can just be done in the street. It's got to be. We've got to call a congress so that this thing can be decided by the Congress. But there was a resistance to this idea, so much so that ultimately, when I was a little bit better, we called a meeting of the Congress National Committee and then said, look, we must not be unfair to these comrades. Let's call them to a meeting so that they must explain why they acted in this way. I mean, frankly, to predict my death, it's completely unfair. It's very saddening, to think about that. And I said, no, it doesn't matter that they felt this way, because sometimes conditions or the life or the condition of an individual may well suggest this. But the thing is, let's go to a Congress then. But then the comrades said, no, we must first call these comrades to a meeting of a disciplinary hearing so that they must come and explain themselves. Now they refuse to come to come and account for themselves why they had done things like that. And of course, the Constitution then also says if you refuse to, when you are invited to a disciplinary hearing, then the party must dismiss you. And then they were dismissed. It's got nothing to do with me. It has to do with the Constitution. If you look into our Constitution, you will see that's what it says. And even it prescribes, there are 2 terms I can serve as, anybody can serve as President of the Congress of the People. But when you have finished those 2 terms, you must agree that there must be called a Congress at which the membership can elect who is the next leader. And I have made it times without number. I've said this again and again. Please, comrades, call a meeting of the Congress and let the membership choose who must lead. Because we must respect the rule of law. Because even in our national constitution, it also says the same thing. So if people transgress the constitution, you can't call that a struggle for power or something. It cannot be like that. There's a constitution, it prescribes, and we must stick by the prescripts of the constitution.
To conclude, how do you see the future of COPE? Do you think that you'll continue to hold your position in Parliament as a party? And where do you see the future of this party going forward?
Look, I have said that I don't want to run ahead of Congress. But I do think that we must see ourselves obeying the prescripts of our Constitution. I honestly feel this way. I will not resign from the Congress of the People. The decisions, you can see from what I'm saying, even about the Freedom Charter, you must know that COPE adopted the Freedom Charter as its official policy. Even after we left the ANC, it doesn't matter that the ANC, in fact, it's a good thing the ANC adopted the Freedom Charter, but we adopted the Freedom Charter ourselves. You can see our emblem, loyal to the national flag, therefore loyal to the decisions taken under the leadership of the ANC at the negotiations, loyal to the policy positions of the African National Congress. The Freedom Charter is also the official document of the Congress of the People. Now, if I want to leave COPE, now where will I go? Why would I want to leave COPE? Because it adopted the Freedom Charter? No. I remain with the Freedom Charter. I remain with the Congress of the People. I still am opposed to the things that the ANC has done when we left it. And this corruption They've got men and women who are they are back on their list. They are going to be their candidates in spite of the corruption that they have done. I will not leave the Congress of the People. I will stay. And I do hope that the Congress of the People will continue along the path we are traveling.
Well, Mr. Lekota, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX. May I say your memory still seems to be very sharp. And we're glad to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, my brother.
Aye.